Welcome to Sermon Brainwave with me, Rolf Jacobson.
And me, Karoline Lewis.
And me, Matt Skinner.
This is the podcast for October 5th, 2025. The first reading is Habakkuk 1:1-4, and 2:1-4. The semi-continuous Old Testament reading is Lamentations 1:1-6. The psalm is Psalm 37, 1-9. The second reading is 2 Timothy 1:1-14, and Luke 17, 5-10 is the gospel reading.
Okay.
Tough text.
Yeah.
Tough text out of Luke 17.
Yeah. Why do you say that, Matt? What's tough about this one?
Well,
I'll let you answer that rather than me answer that.
First of all, I think you need the first 4 verses because I think that's connected to why the apostles say increase our faith.
Mm-hmm.
Second, Jesus' response to increase our faith. If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could uproot this mulberry tree. Well, that's weird.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't really experience that as a sign of faith. And then the question is, how does 7-10 connect, or does it not connect? And as well, and John Carroll spends some time with us in his excellent commentary on the website, it's just hard to preach about that. You're basically saying slaves know they have no rights except just to do what they're told, and which is true, but it hits different in a modern context than it did in Jesus's, perhaps. So it's, and so then there's also the bigger question of like how much the connection, I think, is what makes this the most difficult between the two paragraphs. Is he lessening the importance of faith and raising the importance of obedience as if those are two separate things, or how are they connected? Jesus doesn't give us long discourses on faith the way that somebody like Paul does or the author of James does. So we're kind of left to assume we know what it means when the disciples or the apostles say increase our faith.
Well, and I think your suggestion of adding, I mean, you don't necessarily have to add them in the reading, but in preaching, adding those first verses, occasions for stumbling are bound to come, is what Jesus says. And so be on your guard. That the response of the apostles is a good response, right? Well, then what do we need to be able to get through these stumbling blocks?
Yeah, because the stakes are so high, because discipleship looks so difficult from what he's just said.
And so increase our faith or add to our faith. I think that's one place I would go, is homiletically when and how we request that of Jesus and why. Is that something as part of being a disciple to request that, to ask for that? When are those times when we know we just need more faith? We're not really quite sure what that means, connecting to obedience, but it seems like the right request, or a request that comes from a place where you sense that's what's going to get me through, or that's what's going to matter in this time, in this place. So I would maybe spend some time too on the request itself.
The increase our faith request?
Yeah. And not only, I mean, what's going on here, and in part recognizing that we're getting closer to the arrival in Jerusalem in chapter 19. So contextually, narrative contextually, but also in our own lives, where how does that question surface in a life of faith and discipleship? That's one direction I would maybe go.
Do you want more faith?
Always.
Really? Do you want more faith, Rolf?
Depends on what faith is.
Ooh.
Nobody wants a lecture for a sermon, but people do like teaching in their sermons. And so what I'm wondering about is, I think that post-Enlightenment, we have been very unclear and often just flat out confused about what faith is in our culture. That post-Enlightenment, faith is either intellectual knowledge, and therefore a big part of Christian life is having the right intellectual propositions about God in our brain and saying yes to them. Clearly, that's not all of what faith is. Is faith simply the one work you have to do to be saved? That is faith a human thing? Do we decide? Is it, this is in our tradition, Karoline and my tradition, this has been a 200-year confusion in North American Lutheranism. Or is faith simply the act of believing the promise, and the promise itself creates the faith? It's a miracle and no one knows how it happens, and therefore it's not a human decision, right, those are kind of two sides. But I think in this thing, the point I think is it's who is your faith in is what matters.
So trust.
Yeah.
But then also it goes back to your question, Matt, about the relationship here between faith and obedience, which John Carroll points out too. We might do well to join the apostles' plea for more robust faith and add to it a resolve to embody our faith in persistent and courageous action, or to embody our faith in obedience. And so I think teasing out some of those complications of why we ask for more faith and what we mean by that, and the way in which faith, as you're pointing out, Rolf, takes on a different understanding depending on when you're asking and why.
So then is Jesus's response, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, one possibility is him chastising them. Like if you spiritual idiots only had this much faith, you wouldn't be asking this question. You don't believe how much faith you need. Or is he redirecting the question? Or is he saying no? Because I read this as him saying, my goodness, if you had the kind of faith you wanted, you'd be out here doing these useless displays of power for no purpose whatsoever, like moving mulberry trees.
I think he's redirecting the question.
Mm-hmm. I think he's downplaying whatever they understand faith to be. I think he's downplaying the importance of that and saying, keep doing what you're doing.
Keep doing, yeah.
So increase our faith. And if you had...
Sounds like a bad conference, by the way. Maximize your faith. Keep going. Turbocharge your faith.
Those conferences exist under other names all the time.
Yes, they do.
I know, they do.
All across, by the way, all across the Christian spectrum.
Of course.
Yeah. Maybe that's what Sunday worship is. And anyway, it's to tend and grow people's faith.
Yeah.
To me, that the importance isn't necessarily how much faith I have, but who my faith is in. And I do want more faith, even though I won't always like it. Because sometimes having more faith in this gospel and others means pick up your cross and follow him.
Right.
Sometimes it means you're supposed to not run away when they come to arrest him.
And
not fall asleep.
And that's the tension, right, that Carol is pointing out, is that faith, you want more faith, but it also comes with consequences and or action, or obedience.
Yeah. Although I'm still stuck on the way Jesus seems to talk about faith as power, or at least in this case. One of the manifestations of faith is this amazing power to move trees around.
I'd like that.
And I'd like it in the garden sometimes, but I wonder if some of this exposes the way in which people do view faith as a way of dominating, getting ahead, being able to show off, whatever. Because Jesus, even in Luke, Jesus is a little shy about doing some of the miracles.
Yeah.
I think that want to be known primarily as a wonder worker.
Well, that would be also a way, going back to what Rolf was saying, that would be also another thing to add in the sermon, right? Is that what then we do is what we assume about that, okay, what is this faith going to do? Is it going to give us power to be able to do certain things? And so...
I think we promise that implicitly sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I would go to Habakkuk, and I'm not kidding.
And
that's not what Karoline was going to say, I can tell.
I know.
I don't always think of a segue to Habakkuk. I just have to say.
Except where's Habakkuk again?
I have no idea.
All right, keep going.
Somewhere.
You were making
somewhere
the point.
In the earlier part of my Bible here.
So
Habakkuk, you're making the switch. Good.
If the question is, what is faith? The book of Habakkuk actually is if Ruth is sort of the best parable about what chesed is, I think maybe Habakkuk is the best book in the Old Testament about what faith is. So here's what happens in Habakkuk. And if you're going to, so you could use Luke 17 to introduce the issue and then draw on Habakkuk as one biblical answer to what faith is. So in chapter 1, the prophet complains to God, why does our Israelite society suck so much? Verse 4, the law becomes slack so that justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous, therefore judgment, and that's the same word as justice, mishpat, justice comes forth perverted. So complaining, look, even in the courts, justice doesn't happen, and all through society. And so then God, you have to fill this in because they skip the rest of chapter 1. So God says, okay, I know what we're going to do. If the issue is that your society is so slack and can't produce justice, I'll bring the Assyrians because they can. They know how to impose their understanding of justice. Then Habakkuk goes, well, wait. That's not what I was talking about. God, you're eternal. You will live through the Assyrians, but our generation won't. And then you get to chapter 2, where after the second complaint, the prophet goes, all right, I'm going to stand at my watch post and I'm going to go and see what God says concerning my complaint. Verse 1 of chapter 2. And the Lord's answer is, there will be a vision to come. But until it comes, the just will live by faith. And then if you want to know what that looks like, you go to the end of Habakkuk chapter 3, which is not in the reading, but I would highly point people to, where at the end, the prophet, having started in lament at the start of the book, ends in praise, but it's a weird sort of praise. Though the fig tree does not blossom and there's no fruit on the vines, though the produce of the olive fails and the fields yield no food, though the flock is cut off from the fold and there is no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. That's a picture of the sort of faith that allows one to endure the sort of suffering that Habakkuk's generation had to endure. When the just live by faith, it means they're going to trust that in the midst of the chaos of society and the crumbling of society, that the Lord will have a vision for the future, and the Lord does. That's Habakkuk.
Well, I now have a new appreciation for Habakkuk. I just wish I could spell it. That's usually my problem. Is it 2 B's or 2 K's or both? Or that's always my
I was
issue.
first taught to pronounce it Habakkuk.
Habakkuk.
So I have 2 questions, Rolf, one of which is much more important than the other one.
Okay.
Is it the Assyrians or the Babylonians?
It's the
They're
Babylonians.
called the Chaldeans.
Wait a second.
That was Babylon.
That's a good question. I just confused myself. Chaldeans, yeah, it's the Babylonians. So this is probably right about the same time as Jeremiah is living.
You want to get your marauding empires straight.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do.
Second question, a little more important.
Double check myself because now I'm just forgetting.
Yeah, it talks about the Chaldeans, who I thought that was a code word for Babylonian. But
it can be more broadly any of those Akkadian peoples.
So the righteous will live by faith. I don't want to talk about the New Testament use of that. Of course, this is one of Paul's favorite verses, Habakkuk 2:4.
Right.
In your reading of this, you talked about how Babylonians are coming. It's going to be rough. God still has a vision. You have to live faithfully and in patience. Are there aspects of Habakkuk that suggest that faith is more than passivity? Like it's not just sitting around waiting and suffering your pain in silence.
Yeah, well,
say something about.
By the way, it is the Babylonian. It's the same time as Jeremiah, and so it is Babylon. Thanks for it. Yeah, I mean, I think it doesn't. I think the rest of the book, there's places where it does suggest that faith is this act of resistance. It's the act. I mean, it's a hard act to be grateful when the crops don't come in. Yeah. I mean, I think about what it was like. My great grandparents on my dad's side lost the family farm because of crop failures in the 30s, and that was our last famine, in our country. And how hard it must have been to be grateful when the crops don't come in and you eventually lose everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you done with your questions?
It's not just sitting there. It's not quietism.
Right.
Yeah.
I have one comment. Yeah. I mean, I've too long of a story to explain why this is on my mind, but I'll just say sometimes simply staying alive is faithful resistance when people want to kill you.
Just survive somehow.
Do you know what I mean? And it's an act of defiant faith.
Right. My question, Rolf, is I'm always surprised when Habakkuk comes along because it's not a book I read regularly.
Okay.
and then doing the prep for the podcast today, I was just really moved, honestly. I can't believe I'm saying this about Habakkuk. For there is still a vision for the appointed time.
Yeah.
God says there is still a vision. And how that is an encapsulation of faith, right? That faithfulness is that trust that God has a vision. And especially when it looks like, the world is falling apart, and to be able to say, as an act of defiance, even, or as an act of as a witness to faith, there is still a vision. I was really moved by that, and I don't. Is vision a particular word, or is it just?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What is it? What is it? My Hebrew is a little rusty.
Well, it literally means vision. So in this case, a prophetic vision, a prophetic dream, a prophetic message of good news.
Yeah.
But so then it says in verse 3, wait for it. It will surely come. And then it says it will not delay. But then you're like, okay, how does that fit with the delay part that happens? But,
yeah, right.
But I think that it is that there's good news. But then, notice even the last verse here, Matt, which starts to get at it. And then the stuff in chapter 2 that's never, ever read in church also gets at what's this active nature of faith. Part of it here is look at the proud. Their spirit is not right in them, but the righteous live by faith. That is so that the righteous who depend on God and trust in God and apparently are not the ones sending out injustice from the courts, they have to live in the midst of society that's got the other side, who are called here in this case proud. There's other pairs of words all through Scripture. There's a part in the chapter 2 that is a denunciation of idols, and a denunciation of those who get evil gain for their houses. So I think these are also pictures of what it means to have faith. And by the way, so this is Habakkuk is one picture of faith. There's other picture of faith, but it happens to be the reading, so that's why.
Yeah. And I think, too, that were your sermon to go in that direction, how you could bring Psalm 37 into this in terms of do not fret because of the wicked, trust in the Lord. What I love about verse 3, trust in the Lord and do good. So that kind of gets back to that trust in God, but then that trust is embodied in goodness, in action. That also is an embodiment of faith when all seems kind of lost. Yeah. So that's how I would use the psalm to bring that in at this point.
Agreed.
Lamentations?
Yeah, do a little break from Jeremiah.
Yeah.
To jump into Lamentations for 1 week.
I would call our listeners' attention to the commentary by Brennan Breed. In this way, Lamentations is a dialogue designed to help readers process and heal from these traumatic experiences. And so how, if you sense as a preacher, as a pastor in your congregation, this not maybe necessarily to preach about Lamentations, but how is it that we might, because this is what the commentary talks about, how is it that we enact or practice lament and how important that is in a life of faith. And I think that rather than, talk about lament, how is it that the sermon or, the worship service could be an enactment of an exercise in lament, depending on where, your congregation is and the circumstances for that Sunday.
Yeah, where the commentary is so helpful is it provides an introduction to the whole book, to its structure, but also to kind of its function and how it works. And which you might as well do. I think this is the only time we get Lamentations in 3 years. Maybe not. I'm sure the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases part. The one happy verse in the whole book.
Yeah, which I think is the suggested verses to use as the psalm.
I think you could use that. But a lot of people know that Job is a good book to go to when life's miserable. I'm not sure Job helps, but people know to go there. But a lot of people don't know about Lamentations. And just to give people an introduction to this book and how it doesn't shy away from doing the hard work of naming just what's so terrible and rooting that historically, but also trying to then dislocate it from just the fall of Jerusalem.
It's such a weird text, though, in the sense to preach on, because obviously, the Book of Lamentations are these sets of acrostic city on the hill, broken city, which one of my teachers, I don't know if you had Chip Dobbs-Alsop in graduate school at all, Matt, but Chip's dissertation was on the motif of, in the ancient Near East, cities are feminine in terms of gender, and then in the polytheistic world, every city has a patron goddess. And so the idea if the city is destroyed or loses a war, its patron goddess is the one who weeps. But in this case, because Israel is not polytheistic, you have to have the city itself kind of takes the place of the city goddess. And I'm oversimplifying to the extreme. So you're not actually lamenting. I mean, to me, what I hope this would help us do is actually take time in worship. I mean, it's not very interesting if the preacher teaches about lament again, and then it's a lecture.
Yeah.
But what if you actually give people time, and it could be in your community this week that there's something that needs to be lamented, and then to teach people how to do that, and then do it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And as the commentary mentions that Lamentations is a theology of witnessing to the existence and persistence of suffering. I like that. That as we think about what is the purpose of lament, or how do we define lament, and also create space for readers to hold the ambiguity and uncertainty that often accompany trauma. So I think there's a lot happening. Thinking about living in South Minneapolis and the school shooting at Annunciation.
So, for those people from around the world who don't know, we live close to a place where an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old were killed in a school shooting.
Yeah, at Annunciation. And I have a lot of friends whose children went there over the years, and a lot of connections there. And so... And sensing where that space is.
By the way, our longtime podcast partner here at Sermon Brainwave, Dave Lowe's, had one of the two funerals. He had the funeral for the 8-year-old. And it's a powerful sermon. Yeah,
really important activity of faith.
Well, it's interesting to put that in conversation with Luke 17, for example.
Yeah.
What would faith look like to the inhabitants of Jerusalem in the time of Lamentations, or to the city itself? It's about more than moving trees.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and and as the early church is remembering this, what are they going through? What kind of ups and downs is the early church experiencing about the year 90 or whatever? All right, how long are we going to be in 2 Timothy?
We are going to be in 2 Timothy for 4 Sundays. So this could, of course, be a little mini sermon series if one chose to spend some time in 2 Timothy. There are a couple of important features of 2 Timothy that the preacher might sense this is a good place to land for the next 4 weeks. We have the opening of a confession or witness to the cloud of witnesses that support our faith. In a couple weeks, we'll have one of the more well-known verses of Scripture, that all Scripture is inspired by God. What does that mean? So you might decide, let's dive into 2 Timothy and a couple of these well-known passages that people are like, that's somewhere in the Bible, isn't it?
It seems there's various sort of images of what faith is here. So on the one hand, stir up or rekindle rather the gift of God that is within you through the laying on of hands. But then it says, God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but a spirit of power and of love and self-discipline. So I kind of like that power maybe is a condition by love. But then later it talks about trust. Faith is trust in this passage. Where did I see that?
Verse 12.
Verse 12, thank you. I know the one in whom I have put my trust. So, I don't know.
It's very much a book that's, you have to set it historically, not so much around who wrote it or not, but it's a book that reads as if it's Paul's final words. He's about to move on. So there's a kind of literature called testaments, which are literature that's, a dying person kind of passing along their legacy, their heritage to others. And a lot of this book reads in that way. This is Paul telling Timothy, keep doing what you're doing. It is not a book that seems to be interested in new ideas. It's very much like guard the deposit, keep the faith, hold on to what's been passed down to you. It's your job to be a trustee of it. And some of that has to do with how Paul is remembered after his death, that it's largely his pattern of endurance. Faithful endurance is more important to the church in its early years after Paul's death than Paul's teachings or Paul's theology, which in some ways ties in what we've talked about. We talked a bit about obedience and faithfulness and living that out in the midst of struggle and hardship. And this is a book that promises hardship, but seems to be less interested in preach exactly this, because you already know what you're supposed to preach, but just endure, endure, endure. And so that's where the reference to Lois and Eunice, for example, is really interesting, that Timothy is not just somebody whose head has been filled with good ideas to preach, but he's been enculturated, he's been raised, he's been reared in a way of living and a way of trusting.
Sermon Brainwave is a production of Luther Seminary's Working Preacher. Working Preacher has been a trusted source of inspiration, interpretation, and imagination for preachers worldwide since 2007. Find episodes and links at workingpreacher.org/brainwave. And be sure to rate, subscribe, and comment on YouTube. Thanks for joining us.